Good afternoon, my name is Ola Tamanova and I want to thank everybody who joined us in Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum. It's day 421 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian occupiers, and now we will be talking about the restriction of Ukrainian imports, the imports of Ukrainian agrarian products. I want to introduce a speaker today. It's Olga Trofimtseva, the special coordinator of the Exporters and Investors Council. Miss Olga, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Miss Olga, lately, the last days, there are a lot of discussions of restrictions which were similar to domino effect that our neighbors, the European Union countries, started imposing on us. What are the perspectives you're seeing? On one hand, we understand that currently our grain deal works quite bad, and on the other hand we have problems in land corridors, I mean with the imports of our agricultural products. So what may be the solution? Thank you. The situation is really developing, and for the time being it's no final status quo what we're having at the moment, but judging by the latest results of the negotiations, last news, you know that tomorrow the transit through Polish territory of our grains should be resumed shortly. So gradually this ban will be lifted, the pressure will be relieved from our agricultural exporters, agricultural manufacturers. However, at the same time, we're thoroughly tracking the situation as it is developing, because we understand, it's clear from the statements of the representatives of the European Commission, that such unilateral actions that were imposed by Poland, Slovakia or Hungary, they are not acceptable, and the trade policy of the European Union is the responsibility of European Commission. And for what we understand, for the time being, there are consultations going on between Brussels and the governments of those Western European countries that in principle became outspoken about the concerns of the farmers with regard to the inflow, as they call it, of the Ukrainian grain to those countries. And respectively, this resolution of the European Union, or depending on the position that depending on the stakes that European Commission takes, the situation will develop respectively. We understand that our businesses suffer losses because of the suspension of exports, because of the suspension of the movement of the cargo trucks through the border, and it's related to the fact that we're talking mostly about the crops. But let's not forget that unfortunately Poland restricted the imports of the number of Ukrainian agrarian products, and this list has some questions to it, because even those products that Ukraine does not export to the European Union, like for example pork or mutton, well, it led to the fact that the Ukrainian agricultural exporters are facing the fact that the trucks with honey or milk dairy products are still in the border, and no one understands what to do next. We understand that the Polish customs does not let those trucks through to European Union. So currently we need some clarity. We need to have this situation. We need understanding in this situation, because in any crisis situation, you know, it's transparency and clarity of the rules of the game is the main thing. Now it is the situation for our agricultural manufacturers. For them is the matter of survival. As you mentioned it quite correctly, the grain deal is under pressure at the moment. And we see, well, and it would be a surprise if it would not have happened, if the terrorist state Russia would not have used that opportunity to sabotage the grain deal, the grain initiative. For a couple of days there was the problem with the operation of the inspection center that was urged by the stance of the Russian side, and respectively for the time being it's important for us to have our partners, Turkey and the United Nations, not to withdraw from the firm stance to have the grain deals operating in a sustainable manner. Next week there will be a meeting, most likely in New York, between Mr. Guterres and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Lavrov, and I'm sure the main topic of their conversation will be the operation of the grain corridor. And respectively for us, it's extremely important to preserve that sea export way for Ukrainian grains, and to have clear situation and perspective with on the solidarity export ways, the land corridors through the border of European Union. Ms. Olga, we talked about this yesterday with Mr. Almans-Leston, and we mentioned that our agricultural manufacturers ended up in the situation which is worse than before the beginning of the full-scale invasion. He mentioned that there were quotas for the import previously, but there were no such severe restrictions before. In your opinion, why did this situation become possible? What created this effect? I understand your question. The situation really, well, talking about today, about this moment of escalation or raising of political stakes, obviously now for our agricultural exporters the situation is extremely complicated, because even comparing to the way it was looking before the war, before the full-scale invasion of Russia, we had certain tariff quotas, we had import tariffs for certain types of products, but again, as I said, that was a predictable situation in a sense that our farmers could, agricultural manufacturers, having this information, they could undertake proper resolutions, whether they are competitive in those markets, whether they can export their products in view of all those tariff limitations, or they should not look at European Union as the market, and they have to reorient to Asia or Middle East to export their products. So now the main problem for them is the absence of clarity, absence of clear understanding. The sowing campaign is going on, and in a couple of months they will be able to harvest the first crops of the first wheat, and the agricultural business is built on understanding that you cannot undertake a decision like on the very same day. It's not a manufacturing cycle that can be interrupted at any time. Agricultural manufacturing, it has its specifics, and the manufacturers should have understanding where they will sell their products, how it would be happening. And first of all, now we are in a situation of survival. We are in critical situation because of the Russian invasion, because of the physical destruction of infrastructure and manufacturing capacities, because of the dense contamination of the fields with mines. And on the other hand, this economic, if not blockade, but very difficult situation, very difficult situation with exports, it does not add us any optimism, I mean, to our farmers, to our agricultural manufacturers. So there are big hopes that European Union will act as our partners, as they stated before. Why this situation is taking place, getting back to your question, a couple of months before this additional liberalization and cancellation of tariff limitations for export of Ukrainian products to the countries of European Union, our exporters could make use of those additional opportunities. We've all seen it's no problem to check out the figures and to see to what extent the exports to European Union grew by categories of certain products in the second half of 2022. But it's a question of how this additional export became a threat to the markets of the European Union, because in the European Union itself there are very strict and clear rules for resolving such situations. So if there is a critical threat for a local manufacturer of this or that product, so first of all, for example, like sugar or crops or honey in any country of European Union. So first of all, the manufacturers and the governments of those countries, they should first prove it, that there is a direct connection between the incoming volumes of these or those products, and which resulted in bankruptcy of certain manufacturers or lowering of prices, the manufacturers in Poland or Romania or Slovakia. But for the time being, we don't observe anything like this happening, and there were unilateral restrictions imposed on Ukrainian imports, and they were quite drastic, and they included the products, included more products of agricultural manufacturers based on some indefinite reasons. So it requires additional dialogue between Ukraine and Brussels. We have to proceed to multilateral negotiations, and we should start talking with the national governments of the countries and European Commission to make sure this issue is resolved as soon as possible in a way that would be advantageous for all parties. So do we have understanding? Do we have anything to offer? Can we as a government, as a state, can we come up with any resolution which would be acceptable for all parties, for us and Poland and other neighbors? Well, we have to understand all the nuances that became prerequisites to this situation, which became the reasons for this resolution, and we have to take into account the aspects which were not mentioned in this situation with the restriction of our experts, but they were discussed even earlier. And the fact is that the European logistics was not ready for the volumes of the Ukrainian agricultural products from its border, for their transportation from the border between Ukraine and Poland further on to Europe. So it became a bottleneck from the point of view of overloading of the transportation capacities, logistic capacities, and the insufficient from point of view of the proper capacities of the European ports like Constanța and seaports on the Baltic Sea, which was mentioned by our Polish colleagues and our colleagues from Baltic countries. We see that it is something that should continue developing, and we should be looking for some complex solution. We don't need to chase the witches in this situation and to look for a guilty party, because those searches are over long ago. Everybody knows who is guilty in this situation. It's Russia. Everybody knows who it is. It's Russia and Russian aggression against Ukraine, because it's the fundamental reason for all complications that arise now. This is the reason Ukrainian agrarians end up in this situation, and this is the reason that now the European farmers end up in this situation, and this is the reason the European Commission is facing this unbalanced situation. But reacting to those challenges is another thing that we should emphasize. We should flexibly and rapidly and with account of all those nuances react to this situation. We're saying currently that Ukraine is a candidate to become a member of the European Union, so we cannot put under threat these attempts, these aspirations of Ukraine to join European Union in economic sense, and on the other hand we should not jeopardize by Russian aggression, by Russian propaganda, the dignity of European Union, and no unilateral resolutions may be taken by separate member countries. There should be a joint trade policy, and it should be, well, we should continue trying to find a quick and flexible solution in a win-win format, when there will be understanding that Ukraine has to survive economically in this war, and one of the prerequisites of Ukrainian survival is this liberalized trade within the framework of the existing agreements with the European Union. We have questions on the floor, please. Anastasia Kravchenko, Ukrinform. Good afternoon. I will have a couple of questions. First of all, about the exports to Europe. Ukrainian manufacturers came up with the statements yesterday, or with the demands to our government to mirror the import, to mirror the restrictions, for example, to ban the imports of certain goods from Poland to Ukraine. Is it a good solution? Will it help in solution of the matter with the issue with the restriction of Ukrainian imports? Well, I don't really like this type of resolutions. I understand our companies, our businesses. I haven't seen this application, but I understand it from emotional point of view. I take it with understanding, but I don't think it's real good, because, you know, it will just escalate the situation, and I think that for the time being it wouldn't be the right way to help solve this situation at this phase. I don't think it's worth doing that, because we have opportunity to enter into dialogue with European Commission. If we see that bilateral consultations with the governments of the Eastern European countries, our neighbors, end up in a dead end, I would anyway not proceed to any drastic actions. Well, the second question is with regard to the grain corridor. Russia tries to impede its operation. They cannot stop it, but they in any way block those inspections, and we see that less than in a month it will be 18th of May, and Russia says that the grain deal should start operating on that date. But what is the way to fight them? How to make their attempts impossible? All those attempts to impede and obstacle the operation of the corridor. Well, obviously Russia uses any opportunity to increase their pressure, and it's clear that it's one of their, you know, we're talking about the second front, the economic front, for a reason, and it is the case when we clearly see how important it is to fight in that economic front, to fight with the enemy, Russia, because now, having understanding of how complicated the situation is, they increase the pressure in operation of the grain corridor. So starting from those last news, I think everybody has seen them, that they try to change the rules of the game on the go as to regulation of Ukrainian ports operation, which is unacceptable, and our Vice Prime Minister, Mr. Kubrakov, has visited Turkey to mention the moments of this blackmailing, in fact. So all their attempts, all their tricks, the catches, they do not change. It's sabotage, it's blackmailing, there. The attempts of information fakes and increase of pressure in all areas, on both on us and on our partners. And in response to your question, what can be done, is the firm stance, is the absence of reaction to all those provocations and attempts of blackmailing. There are clear rules, everything is written as to the duration of the agreement, and at the same time I think that our partners also understand it. We should consider worst case scenario to see what can happen in the worst case. Just like you mentioned, that 18th of May, if Russia does not agree to extend the grain initiative, what can happen then? In my opinion, one of the most probable scenarios, one of the most probable options, is the situation that happened in November, when Turkey was taking very firm pro-Ukrainian stance. It was said like, okay, you don't want to continue the work within the framework of the grain initiative, so we will continue working with Ukraine and United Nations further on. And you remember what happened? Russia reverted to its work within the grain initiative. But if you ask me if there is a threat of any military provocations of Russia against commercial vessels, well, once again, we cannot exclude such provocations by Russia, but I think that it would be quite a substantial escalation if there would be attempts like that would escalate the situation significantly. And I think that they are smart enough. Well, it's quite an ethereal hope, but I think they would be smart enough not to escalate the situation and to keep themselves within the framework of the agreements which were so difficult to achieve last year, and to continue operating within the grain deal framework. And what we're talking about here, we're talking about lifting sanctions which, as they say, are useful for Russian economy, and they don't work. However, at the same moment they keep trying, and now the reason, for what I understand, is the same. It's an attempt to lift some financial sanctions that exist for the time being against the oligarchs who manufacture the fertilizers and their main agricultural bank, Rossельхозbank. Ms. Olga, you touched upon the matter of losses. Do we have an understanding of what are the losses of our agricultural manufacturers which result from the restriction of Ukrainian import? I can only reference the words of Mr. Solsky, our minister. The losses are not yet calculated, by judging from what we have, the information that we get from our exporters who have their trucks in the border. We're talking about $100 million here. Thank you very much for the information that you provided. Thank you very much for joining our broadcast. I'm reminding you, joining us was Olga Trofimtseva, the coordinator of the Exporters and Investors Council, and our next briefing will be at 1400. We will offer to you to join the panel discussion, Women, Peace, Security, Ukraine's Defense Sector. So bear with us, work together for our victory, and glory to Ukraine.